It's my honor to introduce today the Dean's Lecture Series speaker, Dan Burns.
Well, I wish I was here. Can everybody hear this? I wish I was here talking about the next iPhone, because you'd all be like, wow, this is really cool. But I'm going to talk to you about banking. And frankly, banking, when I started with the bank, it's like, gee, banking is banking. But if you look at the crisis that came through the world back in '08, banking is a lot more exciting these days. So I'll share a little bit of that. But just to get our juices flowing, I want to talk a little bit about what banks do, and I know you're going to have some time to ask questions of me, but I want to ask you some questions. So you get a little perspective for what I do and what my company does and how we fit in with the rest of the industry. So I'm going to talk about three topics. So first, I'm going to ask you some questions. Then I'm going to describe M&T Bank, and I know some of you are management majors, some of you are finance majors, accounting majors. But look at the deck and think about what kind of culture M&T has created. I think in management you hear about culture. I think one of our biggest successes is the culture we've created at our organization, how important it is to create your own culture and build that over time. And then I'll give you some perspective on the industry right now in general, what's happening, and it's really been crazy. I'm surprised I still have hair on top of my head with all that's been going on. So here are some questions for you. How many of you have never written a check before? I see a handful of people. How many have been in a bank branch the last 60 days? Oh my God, you guys are, so about maybe 40%, so 60 days. How many people here think physical bank branches will go away? That everything will be online and on the internet? Okay. How many banks exist in the United States? Does anybody want to make a guess? Anybody? How much? Not quite that much. Now we're talking about not bank branches, but banks in general. Yes? 4? That's the answer to my next question. I'll tell you, there's 7,000 banks. Now, how many banks are in Canada? 4 or 5 banks. So you can see how the banking system works in the United States and how it works in Canada. And I think when we went through the crisis, a lot of us in the United States were saying, gee, maybe we could learn something from Canadian banking system. So now, out of the 100 largest banks that existed 30 years ago, how many are in existence today? So in 1983, the top 100 banks, how many are around today? Anybody want to guess? 10? Close. There's 23 banks remaining. So what did that happen? Did they go out of business? Not necessarily, just a lot of consolidation between that top 100. Now I know some of you, I remember we were talking that you had a test on what caused the financial crisis. And now can you tell me how you answered that on the test?
Well, I can't tell you if I got the answer correct yet or not, but there's a couple. We went over, I think, 4 basic theories, and kind of some of them went against and coincided with the others. Securitization of mortgages was one. Too much government intervention. Also, another theory was not enough government intervention. And then I believe the other one was the use of credit derivatives and whether how significant they were in actually playing as far as the collapse of the mortgage sector, rather than the other 98% of derivatives that have been used for hundreds of years and not really seen any huge collapse with that. So I think dusted on all 4 topics and didn't really dive too deeply into it. But I think again the saying series of unfortunate events really kind of sums it up the best way you can. It's kind of not really as one of those aspects or issue kind of brought down the whole collapse, but it really kind of really a domino effect. Put it in layman's terms, really just kind of got everything really rolling and did so in a bad way. So.
Yep. All right, I'll give you an A, but I can't guarantee you're going to get one on the test. Okay.
It's your recommendation.
You know, banking, and our CEO, who's been running the bank for 30 years, you know, banking was this profession that, you know, like, I mean, watch It's a Wonderful Life, you know, and what's the father figure? George Bailey, right? So George Bailey, you know, lost his uncle or somebody lost the deposit when he went to the bank, and they ran out of money, and there was a call on their loan, the bank's loan. But if you think about what George Bailey stood for in banking, you know, what they did was they took in deposits from customers and they lent it out to people in the form of mortgages and loans. And it was a profession that everybody thought very highly of. And these are ethical people running the banking system. Well, 2008 changed all that. And it was very scary to see that, you know, greed and trust and really find what some would term, you know, probably some of the professors would term this, you know, financial innovation kind of gone bad. And what had ended up happening is no one trusted each other. Even though they had a lot of equity on their balance sheets, nobody trusted each other. They all believed in the rating agencies. They believed in the credit score. They believed that housing prices would never go down. They believed that delinquency of mortgages would never go to 10%. And it became kind of a last man standing game. And some people made a ton of money on it. I don't know if anybody's read the book, The Big Short, but it's kind of a great way of describing how the crisis hit. And really what happened was there was a lack of trust and a lack of liquidity in the marketplace where everything shut down. And on this past Friday, we had a former Fed governor come talk to us at the bank, and she went through stage by stage what happened. So many of you were you know, between 13 and 18 years old or so back then, but it was very, very serious. So that has changed our whole industry, and you know, what I want to talk about today, is kind of what my bank does, and how what happened in '08 has changed the industry in general. And I was joking with someone in the back that, you know, if you guys are looking for jobs, you know, there's a lot of bank examiners out there and a lot of consultants giving us a lot of advice, because the government does not want that crisis to happen again. And so what have they done? You know, we have to keep more money in our bank accounts on the side for a rainy day. We have to keep, and part of that capital we have to keep in very safe cash investments. So if something happened, we could draw on that. We have to go through extensive stress testing now. So the biggest fear of Congress and the Federal Reserve is that the banking system has a chance of going down again. So this is some of the things that are going on. Stress testing, we have to create a living will. So if one day something happens to us and our company dies, how do we distribute the assets and pay off all our debtors? There's all sorts of consumer financial protection agencies being created now to protect the banking system. And then recently, and it's really affected M&T in a big way because we're trying to do an acquisition in New Jersey, but we can't get it done until we improve our technology and governance around two acronyms, and I wonder if anybody knows what they are. Does anybody know what AML-BSA stands for? Anybody? Anti-Money Laundering Bank Secrecy Act. So what does that mean? That means that one of the biggest worries we have as a nation and as a world is the idea that terrorists and cyber warfare will use bank accounts to take hold of all the money and use bank accounts to transact business across the globe. Now, I'm not sharing secrets here when I say everybody's heard of HSBC, right? That bank? They were caught laundering money for Mexican drug lords in Mexico. And they got caught. They almost lost their charter to be a bank in the United States. They had to pay a $1.6 billion fine. So one thing Congress hates more than anything else is a surprise, and a surprise like that. So all the banks now have to really create these anti-money laundering bank secrecy acts. So you can't just go into a bank and deposit $25,000 in cash and not have the bank say, now where did you get that? This wasn't your baptism money, was it? This wasn't, it wasn't your birthday lately, right? Or, you know, now were you making a drug deal and this is the money? That's really probably the biggest issue right now that don't let the banking system fail, and don't let the bad guys use the banking system to launder their money and get them to, and don't let the Russian cyber warfare attackers, hackers to get at your system. Those are the kind of the two biggest things that are going on in the system. So I wanted to kind of give you a flavor for that. And I also want to ask you, how does a bank make money? Anybody want to, who's the money and banking professor? No, just kidding. Interest. Yep. So the answer is people have cash, they need open checking accounts, they need open savings accounts, they need open CDs. We'll pay them nothing on the checking account, and these days, almost nothing on the savings account, almost nothing on the CD, and then we'll take that money and we'll lend it out through car loans, home equity loans, mortgages. Pretty simple business. Problem is, the crisis happened because people got away from that simple business, and they decided to trade derivatives. They tried to take these loan pools and get them, and someone who couldn't afford to have that fourth house got that fourth house because their credit score was good. And people were making bets and hoping that the other side would take that bet. But in its very simplest form, banks simply do is take in deposits and make loans. And then there's things around that we do. So it's a pretty simple business, but the problem was a lot of banks went away from that. And what you'll see here in my presentation about M&T is I'm happy to say that we weren't perfect, but we were able to dodge the crisis because we stuck to that simple taking in deposits, making loans. And if you can just do that really well, you can be successful. So if you think about what a typical manufacturer, how many, I gotta pick on another, who's an accounting major? Afraid to raise your hand now, okay. So with a business, it's revenues minus cost of goods sold equals gross profit, right? So I know, and when we talk to business customers, on average, you got me with that, by the way. I'm already getting heckled, and I haven't even really, but anyway, so the typical manufacturer, you're not working for M&T, I'm sorry, I know you're talking. But the typical manufacturer might have a 20% gross margin. What's the bank's gross margin? If we're paying you 1% on your money and we're getting 5% on the loan, what's our margin? 4%. So banks work over very, very thin margins, and the goal is to be able to make those loans and make good loans. The CEO of our bank, Bob Wolmers, I've been with banks since 1986. He's been running the bank since 1983. I remember when I first met him, like on my first day, and he goes, "Dan, I just want you to know it's okay to make mistakes, but just don't make any bad loans because they hurt." And we were able to dodge those bad loans through the crisis where a lot of banks were not. So I'm going to go really quick through a little story about M&T. And again, if you have any questions along the way, please feel free to let me know. Let's see if this will work. Yeah. So my employer, and again, think about this in the context of the culture of the organization and what you've learned. Think about this in finance in terms of the numbers you're going to see over here and how we've done year over year. Think about a bank that in 1856 was created in Buffalo, and nothing happened up until 1990. So how many years is that? I mean, it's 136 years or something like that. So we were started in Buffalo, and when Wilmers came in 1983, he said, let's grow this thing. So when I started with the bank in 1986, we were the 4th largest bank in Buffalo, right? Number 4 in Buffalo. We had 40 branches, $2 billion in assets. Today, we're the 16th largest bank in the country. We've gone from $2 billion in assets to $83 billion in assets. And you can see that we started right here in Buffalo, and now we're all the way down to Richmond, Virginia. So we have 15,000 employees, 700 branches, ATMs all over. And we bought a bank called Wilmington Trust. Anybody heard of Wilmington Trust? You know, they're down here in Delaware, and they were $83 billion in assets. That would be how much in loans we have. When we bought Wilmington Trust, we went from $10 billion in assets under management to $79 billion. So a lot of that was Wilmington Trust. And when I say assets under management, it means that A relative died and gave you $100,000 and you needed somebody to invest that for you. That's what that 89 or 79 billion is us taking people's money and investing it for them. So with that acquisition back in 2011 with Wilmington Trust, we became this even barbell of a bank that does traditional banking, one that does wealth advisory and invests people's money through Wilmington Trust. So about M&T, this is a culture built around sticking to the knitting, being a good corporate community supporters in our community time and time again, and having kind of the latest technology, and those are the things that you need from a big bank, but operating as small banks in 18 or 19 different regions, Rochester being one of them. Does anybody know where M&T Bank Stadium is? Baltimore. So we bought a bank in Baltimore in 2003 that was about the same size as M&T was that time. It was a huge acquisition. We were worried about the integration and how that would work. We were worried about how will people understand what M&T is. No one knew M&T in Pennsylvania, much less Baltimore. So we said, you know what, something like 100,000 cars drive by that stadium every day. We said, you know what, I think it'd be a good idea if we named that stadium. So that's what we've done. And even though our CEO, Bob Wilmer, said, I'm holding my nose while I signed off on this, it did work out to be a very good deal for the bank. It just so happens they won the Super Bowl last year. And we are also a big supporter of the Bills. Any Bills fans here? Yeah, I used to be, but then Sunday happened. And this is our headquarters in Buffalo. And these are some of our branches. And we really are a bank that believes in giving back to the community. We think that's a great way to do business. Now, I know we have some marketing professors back there. So as we were coming up with our tagline in terms of what do we want people to think about us when they think of M&T, we want people to think that we have a history of stability and success, knowing that when our customers succeed, so will M&T. That if we work hard, spend the time, and understand what's important to our customers, that we can guide them and help them achieve their financial goals. And this approach helps build long-term relationships. Because let's face it, we're selling at the core checking accounts. And a lot of checking accounts look the same. So it's about our people and how they develop relationships with their clients and how they service their clients is what really makes the difference. Again, it's developing that culture. So I've been with the bank 27 years, and this slide has been with M&T for 27 years. And I think it's a good one. It's pretty simple, but when we get up every morning, we're thinking about, you know what, as an organization, we have to make sure that we balance all three of these things. Best place to work for our employees, best place to do business for our customers, and best investment our shareholders ever made. If we somewhere along the line don't keep that in balance, if we don't take good care of our employees, not just compensation, but making them feel good about what they do, giving them opportunity, if that gets out of whack, those employees are going to leave, their customers are not going to be happy, they're not going to buy products from us, the investors aren't going to be happy because our earnings per share will be lower. So, you get what I say, how important that is to keep that stool, that three-legged stool, all balanced and even. And we've been able to do that now for 30 years. I talked about the fact that we focus on our customers, communities, and shareholders. We don't give analysts an idea of what our earnings are going to look like. A lot of banks say, well, this is what you could expect from us in the third quarter on the earnings call. We don't do that. We let people figure it out for themselves. Now, sometimes it comes back to haunt us, but we believe that we're a bank that can't focus on short-term returns. We have to think about the long term. And as I said, it's so important that you make good loans, because all it takes is one bad loan, and you're going to feel it, and it's going to sometimes it causes a domino effect. Think about Wilmington Trust. I told you we bought them. They had $79 billion in assets under management. They had $10 billion in loans. As I said, M&T had $80 billion in loans. That $10 billion in loans, when the crisis hit, it was all real estate that they lent out on the Delaware shore, and basically 20% of that was going to go bad. They were forced to sell, not because they didn't do a good job managing people's money. They were forced to sell because they made some bad loans in Delaware, and they couldn't recover. And that's where M&T came in. It's been a great acquisition for us. The other thing is we make sure that our employees are invested in the company. So we have a stock purchase plan, and as you can see here, 60% of our employees own stock. which is it's something you don't see in most organizations. And as we've grown over the years, Bob Wilmer's, his philosophy is, you start in Buffalo, we got to Rochester, we move along the thruway. We didn't buy any banks in Florida, we didn't buy any banks in Atlanta. We stayed very adjacent to all of our markets, and the goal was, our strategy, again, this is helping you for some of your classes, our strategy was to really be dominant in the markets we're in and the markets that are close to us. And as a result of that work, we're now the #1 bank in those, you can see these markets, and I took offense when I saw this slide because it says Rochester's #2. We're actually #1 now, and Dan saw that. What happened in Rochester was, anybody here do business with HSBC before they left? Anybody? Yeah, so HSBC decided to get out of the New York State market, and so they were the #1 bank in town. And they decided to get out. It was a strategic move for them. They sold most of the branches of First Niagara, then a few to like 5 Star, a few to Community Bank, and a few to Key Bank. And as a result of that, we had a huge, and if I see marketing professors back there, we had a huge campaign. We didn't tell anybody because we didn't want to say we were going after all these customers, but we internally had a huge marketing campaign to go after as many HSBC customers as we could. As a result, we got $2 billion more in deposits in Rochester, and that launched us from being the #2 bank at about an 18% share to the #1 bank with a 25% share. And does anybody know who the second largest bank in Rochester is? I couldn't have guessed this. Anybody want to guess? Who said Chase? You're right, it's Chase. And Chase has been a bank that's been quietly just kind of hanging around. It hasn't really been that active, but they're now the #2 bank in Rochester. The government was giving banks a lot of grief about, hey, you're not lending money. We're going through this crisis and you're not lending any money. So Bob Wilmers, our CEO, said, all right, I guarantee you we're going to lend money and I'm going to give you a number. So you can see, even in 2012, we made 157,000 new loans, totaling $24 billion. And we also, it's not just quantity and making loans, it's about quality and having good people and products and services for our clients. So we've won a couple of awards there. So sorry for bragging, but you asked me to speak, and I'm going to brag about my company. Okay? And I talked to people earlier about what it means to work for M&T and about a culture. If you have a good culture, people are going to stay longer. And if they stay longer, they're going to have good relationships with their clients. So we have a question. Great.
Hi, I'm Radina. Radina Magazine, Business Administration, class of 13. I was just curious to know, are there any markets that you've attempted to enter and were unsuccessful with?
Very good question. Yes, I think if I go to the next slide, I'll answer that question. But real quick, you can see what our tenure is. Management group is about, there's like 20 women and men who run M&T's management group. They're on the management group. There's like 20 of them. They run the bank. And this is what makes it M&T, I like to call it a big bank that acts small. Every Tuesday, right now, is today Tuesday? Yeah, every Tuesday, if you're, now we go from Buffalo to Richmond, Virginia. If you're on management group, you have to fly to Buffalo and meet in person with this management group. If you don't want to be there in person, if you don't want to come to Buffalo, and as CEO Bob Wilmer said, well, do you really want to be on management group? Maybe, I guess you don't want to be on management group. But these are the guys that make all the decisions. On average, they've got 23 years with the bank. Branch managers have 14, and our tellers, you think about tellers being a very transient workforce, but we're double the national average in 8 years. 9 years is a long time there. So we have a very good long-term base. We give back to our communities, 15,000 employees, not only with volunteerism, but also in order for us to do acquisitions, we have to make sure that we have the highest CRA rating. So CRA meaning that you're giving back in your communities, you're lending to low to moderate income areas, and we have gotten the highest rating for 30 straight years. Funny, that's when our CEO, Bob Wilmers, took over. But we know that if you give back to your communities, you do a good job there, when you go to make an acquisition, those markets, like Baltimore, like Delaware, like Richmond, Virginia, they're going to say, hey, M&T's a good bank, they give back in their community, they got the highest CRA rating, we're going to welcome them in this market. So, and the other thing that we talk about is giving back not only volunteer hours, but our money. And Dan talked about that. We give about $1.3 million in Rochester alone. We give, about $20 million overall throughout the bank. And it's interesting because, and those of you in marketing aren't going to like this, but For a bank our size, we should spend about $100 million on marketing. But if you watch the TV or listen to the radio, you don't see a lot of ads for M&T. We spend about $50 million. But we use our charitable budget as our way of marketing the bank. Because we feel if we can be a good citizen in our communities and help some of our nonprofits and organizations succeed, like at Brockport, we give about $40,000 to $50,000 to support the writer's voice and the artifact. So, if we can do that and be considered a good citizen, then people will want to do business with us. So it's a charitable budget, but it's also a bit of a marketing budget. And again, and we'll get to your question. I haven't forgotten it, but there's a slide that'll talk to what you're asking. When the crisis hit, what did the banks do wrong, basically? They made bad loans. They made bets on loans that went bad. So all the banks were losing money. And what happens when you lose money? I don't know if in your finance classes, you have that bathtub that's filled up with water, and the drain is the dividend, right? So you keep earning money, it keeps going in, and then the dividend comes out and gets paid out to the shareholders. Well, when you're losing money, you can't pay a dividend. And almost every bank couldn't pay their dividend, or they had to issue stock. And when you issue stock, that's like sharing your pizza with more people. You're going to get less of a slice. So we at M&T we didn't have to do that. Now people will say you were lucky, and why were we lucky? Because we weren't in Florida, Arizona, California, Georgia. We weren't in those states where all the housing crisis hit that really caused the financial crisis. But I'd like to say that we were also pretty smart, that we didn't buy any CDOs or had relatively little exposure to that. So we were able to survive. So if we were lucky, I think we were a little lucky that we were up here in upstate New York where there is no boom or bust. So housing prices stay relatively stable. But because of that, we have this history of strength and stability that's recognized in the marketplace. And you can see our performance there versus the other S&P and Bank Index. We've done very well as a bank. And again, it's about our culture and sticking to our knitting. Your question about acquisitions. In order for us to get to the 16th largest bank in the country, we couldn't just do it with, and that's my phone, I think. It's not an iPhone, I'm sorry. But anybody see the new BlackBerry? So we couldn't just grow organically. Now you learn this in school, like how do you grow a business? Is it organic? But the fun part is making acquisitions. And you can see that M&T from 1856 to 1990 we did nothing, and then boom, you look down here in 1990. In 1982 we did a small acquisition, but in 1990 we got to Rochester. We bought Monroe Savings Bank in Rochester. We bought Central Trust in Rochester. We bought First National Bank of Rochester. The Citibank branches. So it was a combination of acquisition and organic growth. Now you talked about markets that we've tried to get into, we weren't successful. One thing we're working on right now is a bank we're trying to acquire in New Jersey. They're in New Jersey, Long Island, and Connecticut, and a little bit in the Hudson Valley. It's called Hudson City Savings Bank. It's public information. We are very close to acquiring. Both shareholder groups have approved it, but the government wants us to, I don't know, maybe it's because we're going to New Jersey, and you know what the #1 white-collar city is in the country? Camden, New Jersey. So maybe they're worried that there's a lot of white-collar crime to worry about, and we have to make sure that our bank secrecy AML is all set up. But that's an acquisition that we wanted to do, and we're hoping to get that done next year. It's kind of 50-50 at this point, but that's one area that we've always used New Jersey as we've kind of taken it out of the United States and made it the Atlantic Ocean because we weren't there, but now we can drop back into our slides. So, but I'm trying to think of any other acquisitions. We actually did want to buy the HSBC branches. It was between us and First Niagara, and First Niagara's headquarters in Buffalo, just like ours are. And at the end of the day, we determined that it was just too much to pay for, and we stepped away. And in hindsight, no disrespect to First Niagara, but everything turned the wrong way in terms of the economic conditions that made that deal work. Were greatly affected after they acquired it. Everything went wrong. and it really affected them. So we were fortunate that we say that that was the best acquisition we didn't do. But you can see we've done a lot. And as time went on, all these banks became M&T, except our most recent one, Wilmington Trust. And when we looked at the brand, and here are the marketing professors, and when we looked at the brand, we said, gosh, we can't change Wilmington Trust with 79 billion, or they had 70 billion in assets under management. We can't change that to M&T. They're much better at wealth management and in institutional trust and custody work than M&T will ever be. So for the first time in our history, we said we're keeping the Wilmington Trust brand. And it's been very interesting to see our marketing guys, because I'm like, can I have, in my office downtown, it says M&T Bank, can I have a little sign that says Wilmington Trust? And they're like, oh no, we can't do that. That will dilute the brand. We cannot do that. I'm like, well, we own it. And I want people to know that we have this new company that does great work for people. So I'm always fighting my marketing folks in terms of helping us, and like, you know, do we want to support if we support the RPO, Rochester Philharmonic Orchestra, you think those people who go to those shows have money? They're not looking for money. They want to invest their money. So I'm like, can we move from M&T to Wilmington Trust to match, you know, for RPO? So these are some of the debates you have when you have two brands, and it's really been a challenge for us. But so far the acquisition has been very good. I'm trying to think of any other acquisitions that we didn't do, that we wanted to do. There was a time when Santander, anybody heard of Santander? They're a large bank in Spain. They wanted us to buy their bank called Sovereign, which is out of Philadelphia. And you talk about culture. We met their management team, and we said, you know what? This culture is not going to work. So we ended up not doing that. Thankfully, that didn't happen, and then we got Wilmington Trust as a result. So if you look at our deposit share in our markets, again, Bob Wilmer's philosophy 30 years ago was to be dominant in markets like Rochester, Syracuse, Buffalo, then we got down to Baltimore, and you can see how fast our deposit share grew. A lot of that is because when the crisis hit, everybody was scared to death about their money and what was going to happen. The government said, okay, the Fed said, we're going to make sure rates are really low. And the government said, you know what, the other thing we're going to do is we're going to make all checking accounts guaranteed. So people have been hoarding all their cash and putting them into bank accounts. So this is a little bit skewed because of that phenomenon, but you can see that the bank's done very well there. And I talked about that, you know, out of the 100 largest banks, only 23 remain, and out of those 23, M&T has the best return to shareholders of 15.5%. So just a little old George Bailey Bank in Buffalo, but doing quite well. And I wish I had $2,281 to invest in M&T stock in 1980. I was a sophomore in high school, and my job on the greens crew at Batavia Country Club didn't pay that much, so I wasn't able to do that. But you'd have $1 million today if you made that investment. And just quickly about Wilmington Trust. This is an interesting franchise. They were started by the DuPont family. Everybody know who the DuPonts were? They invented gunpowder and Teflon, probably one of the richest families in the world. Well, they needed to create a bank to house all their money and all their rich friends' money, I guess. And they said, let's make Delaware, where Wilmington is headquartered, let's make Delaware the most tax-friendly state in the country. So if you want to set up an entity and try to have as much flexibility in terms of tax and ownership structures and that, Delaware is a place to be. We acquired that, and it's been a great acquisition, but it's only been a couple years in its infancy. But it really helped us get away from just the loan business and into something that isn't as much capital intensive, which is the fee business related to Wilmington Trust. So, and another unique thing is they're global. So I joke that where all the rich people are, that's where Wilmington Trust is. So California, Florida, they've got an office in Atlanta. They're up here in London and Ireland. So, but it's been a great opportunity for us. And you know, Kodak went bankrupt, right? And so when you go bankrupt, you have to have a bankruptcy trustee. Well, Wilmington Trust was the bankruptcy trustee for that bankruptcy, and they've been the trustee of 10 of the 15 largest bankruptcies. So think about what our business model is going forward, is to utilize these two brands, and instead of saying to a customer, okay, you need a loan? Okay, let's fill out this application, we need your deposit accounts, and let's do some treasury management, because you'll need to worry about how you make your payments and how you receive your payments. Now we say to customers, okay, you're 100% owner, and you're 55. You know, in 10 years, you probably want to sell it. Are you going to sell it to your kids? Are you going to do an ESOP? Are you going to close it up? Or are you going to sell it to a strategic buyer, someone in your industry? Are you going to sell it to a private buyer, a private equity firm? So these questions we never asked as a bank. Now we have Wilmington Trust and what we call the Delaware Advantage. So we're starting to tell people, you know, you really ought to sell a piece of your company to your wife or your kids so they get this minority interest, which when you sell it, you're going to benefit on taxes. And then we said, okay, well, now we're going to help you structure the company. Now we're going to help you sell it. And we have a group out of Baltimore that talks to business owners and helps them sell their companies. When you sell the company, you're going to get all this cash. And guess who can manage that cash for you? Wilmington Trust. Oh, but the company that's buying it, they're going to need financing. Oh, gee, we do that. Hey, can we help you finance that business? Oh, gee, you've got all this money now and you don't know what to do with it. You want to give it back to the community? You want to leave some to your kids? We can do that too. So our business has evolved now from just a traditional, we're still all about deposits and loans, but now we can add this value all the way across the business cycle for a client. Now, how many times does that happen in markets like Rochester, Buffalo? When you do one of those, it's like the best feeling in the world. And when I was a branch manager, how are we doing on time? Are we okay? When I was a branch manager in 1995, at downtown here at Exchange Street, which is now a condominium complex, by the way, but a customer came in, or actually an accountant referred it to me. I was telling people how important accountants are to the commercial business and the loan business. So the accountant refers this customer to me. He wants to leave the defense industry and start his own company. And I said, okay. 1995, we opened the account. We took in his deposits. We made him loans. And we told him, you know, gee, you know, maybe you ought to think about selling your business. In 2007, he was thinking about it, and he said, gee, you know, I heard I might be able to get like $5 million for my business. That's awesome. Now I said, well, talk to our people at the bank and let us help you sell it. We'll create an auction for you. Well, he ended up selling that business for 20 times that. So now that's like once in a career kind of deal, but you can see that if you can do that across the life cycle and then build again a new business relationship, that's really what banking is about and what we try to focus on. And Wilmington Trust really helps us to fill all those holes in. So I said it's wealth advisory, it's institutional and client services, and you know, between the two of us, we feel like we have this perfect marriage now that we can share this extra value to our business clients and our personal clients for that matter. And there I talked about Bob Wilmers. There he is. I said he's been running the bank for 30 years. John Halstead's met him many times. He turns 80 next year, but he's still probably the most active guy in the branch, in the bank, I should say. And he's my hero. Other than my father, he's my hero. And all of us would be lucky to have bosses like him to work for. So when you're looking at employers, don't think about just pay or you know, think about, okay, how is this organization run? How is the management? Will it present opportunity for me? Is this company going in the right places? It all starts at the top. And Bob Wilmers is a great example of that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the bank's money earnings real quick and what the economy has done to us. We had a record year in 2012. And why was that? Because rates were low and everybody needed home mortgages. They were refinancing like crazy. So that helped out a lot. But guess what? Third quarter, rates went up a little bit and people stopped refinancing, and that really affected our share. At the same time, I said the government was really cracking down on the banks and making sure that we're better regulated, that the issues that happened last crisis won't happen again. Well, we had to spend a lot more money, and because of that, our earnings were down a little bit in the third quarter. So, as I said, mortgage banking was down, operating expenses were down. We had to pay for BSA-AML. There's a test on that, so you're going to have to remember what BSA-AML is. No, I'm just kidding. But we've had to spend a lot of money internally to support what the government wants banks to look like going forward. You know what our biggest fear is as a bank? That we become a utility, where we can't raise prices, where every move we make has to be approved by an entity. And we were making returns around 29%, which is really good, like really good for the industry. We're down now, one of these slides will show it, we're down about 15, 16%. So you can see what the effects of a slow economy, higher expenses, lower mortgage revenues has really had on the banking industry as a whole. And the things we worry about are loans and how much money we have in capital, how much money the government wants to have us hold in capital. So our charge-offs are right on track, but we're happy about that. But you never know what's going to happen, in terms of that part of the business. And then we've raised our capital ratio. So the more money you have to put on the shelf, the more difficult it is to earn money. Because that money's sitting there not earning anything really. You have to invest it in securities. You can't put it in a loan. So it really affects your returns. But the government wants us to be at around 9 or 10%. Before the crisis, we were at about 5. So we've had to basically double the amount we have on the shelf so that it can be there for a rainy day. Couple of things, net interest margin, I talked about profit margin. You can see there that the peer group's around 3.31. So even though expenses are going up like crazy, we're not able to pass those costs on to our customers very well. So what this would mean, if we could charge higher rates, then our margin would go up, but we're really not able to do that because the competition is so fierce. Efficiency ratio, for every dollar of expense we have, every dollar of revenue we have, how much do we have in expense? So the lower number, the better. You can see here that it's really been a challenge for banks to keep that number at a level. Years ago, we wanted to be at 45%. We realize now, the way things are, we're going to have to do that. And as I said before, if you're looking for work, compliance, audit, bank examiner, consultant, those are kind of the hot jobs that we see coming through our door every time. But being in banking is good too. This is again talks about the risk-adjusted margin after you take out charge-offs. How well are you doing at making money? We look okay there. This gives you a real idea of what happened in the crisis. So everybody's humming along here, at around less than 1%. These non-accrual loans are loans that stop paying or they're in trouble. You're not ready to write them off, but you're worried about them, and you have to account for them a certain way. So here we are humming along, and then the crisis hit. And then charge-offs are loans that you actually do write off. Here we are humming along, and the crisis hit. But you can see M&T, because we were lucky and good, we're in upstate New York where we didn't have a lot of these issues, and we were managed well. We were much less than what the market was like. And then this is another slide that talks about our charge-offs and reserve coverage. And these are things that we look at. If you look down here, these are our banks. Zion is a bank that we compare ourselves against. Key Bank, Wells Fargo, U.S. Bank, PNC, Fifth Third, BB&T, Huntington Banks, Regions. These are all banks we think are the best in the country, and we try to benchmark ourselves against them each and every day. And again, at your companies, when you get jobs, think about who your competitors are. Always benchmark yourself against them. And then, this is what our shareholders care about. And as I said, in the crisis, everybody had to cut their dividends. They were losing money, so the returns were down low. We were able to keep pretty stable. But as you can see, in 2007, we were around 22. Now we're down to 17. So the industry is definitely taking a hit. And but in any event, this is our dividend growth. And this is what you can do with that money. You can pay out dividends. You used to be able to repurchase your own shares. People talk about Apple, they've got all this cash on the balance sheet. Should they buy their shares back? Because your decision is, do you buy the shares back, or is there some way to deploy that capital in a product or service that you have that will give you the returns you want? So at M&T, because of the last 5 years we couldn't, the government wouldn't let us repurchase shares even if we wanted to. We basically kept our dividends stable, and we retained our capital because, as I said, we had to go from 5% to 9%, so we had to really jump that up. But if you look at all the businesses that exist today, and you look back since 1980, some of the companies aren't around anymore that you would think of, but you can see the Gap, Walmart. Apple wasn't around in 1980, so it kind of takes them out of the equation. But M&T is the 24th largest, best return of all companies that have been in existence that period of time. So I'll just quickly say that it's been a tough year for banks as a whole. When they announced their earnings, 76% of them hit their earnings, 24% did not. It's still revenue's still not there, loan demand is still not there. So you think about the economy and trying to find jobs, and most of it is all about consumer spending. So if consumer spending's up, then more companies need loans, and that comes into the bank. But you can see our loan growth is at 7%. It should be better than that. That's the industry. Deposit 4%. Margin is down. So it really paints a really nasty picture for banking. But this is the reality that we're in. But the good news is, the banking system is something that the economy needs. And as I said, when I started with the bank, it was pretty simple. It was a pretty easy job. I worked in the branches. I opened accounts and talked to business customers. And now as I worked my way through my career and went through this crisis, which many of you really didn't know what it meant, now you can see what is happening in the marketplace is the federal government is saying we cannot have this crisis. We were this close to an economic tsunami, and we can't let that happen again. And banks now, it's kind of fun actually. It sounds bad because there's so many different things now that we have to factor in, and so many moving parts. But at the end of the day, if we're going to be the best bank in the country, we're going to have to adapt and do things smarter than our competition. Not to say that we're going to be successful, but we sure as hell are going to try. So the key story for banks in the future is that we've been relying on the fact that the economy's been okay, that we haven't had to charge off a lot of loans. And as long as that continues, the banking sector will be okay, just okay. But if there is a little hiccup in that loan book where we have to charge off some loans, it could very literally put us back into a recession. So that's all I really have. And I appreciate your patience, and I'd be glad to answer any questions that anybody has.